everyone, it's Lindsay and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to the latest and technically first real installment in my publishing trends series. My aim with this video is to help you keep informed about all of the current children's traditional publishing marketing trends, as well as how to best market your books, come up with really hot ideas, and find agents and agencies to query. And then when we get done with the stats and analysis, I always like to go through and share some of the announcements that I find most exciting, and hopefully you do too. But before we dive in, really quick, some housekeeping. All of these stats and all of these deals that I'm going to talk about today are available online to the public for free. You just go to publishersweekly.com and they have a children's newsletter you can sign up for, and bi-weekly they will send you all of the announcements. Because of that, this data is only going to be covering middle grade and YA. There is unfortunately no adult list. I know so many of you guys were excited for me to do this with adult, but there's no like way that I can find all of the adult deals because they're not announced in one single place. It's just like each author does their own thing. It sucks. I wish there was, so I'm sorry, but I can't do it. I'm also only going to be covering the fiction because that is what is most interesting to me. At any point, my math might be wrong. If you catch something, don't tell me about it, mind your business. We will be talking about author demographics as well, and my goal here is not to police identities. I want authors that are open about their certain marginalities to be open about those things, to be able to count towards the marginalities on my list, if that makes sense. So there's always a chance that data may be skewed because someone is not, say, out as a queer person or racially ambiguous. Those things happen. Also, my stats here will be intersectional. So for example, if someone is both queer and disabled, they will show up in both categories. I would deeply love to add a section next time I do this where I go over cover trends. My problem has been finding good resources that send these covers directly to my inbox. I know there are a couple YA spaces that I follow on Instagram that do give YA cover reveals. I've been struggling to find one for middle grade, and even the YA ones I found are not like all of them, you know what I mean? So if you guys have any good resources for that, let me know, and hopefully when we do next quarter trends, I'll be able to add those in. Okay, housekeeping's over. Let's go ahead and dive right into the stats. All of the stats that I'm going to be sharing with you today were collected from September to November. On average, most people announce 4 to 6 months after they actually get the book deal. So I'm guessing that most of these deals were made March through May. In total, there were 173 book deals announced. And here is the breakdown for the YA versus middle grade. About half and half, with YA being a little bit of a bigger chunk, is about what I would expect. You have asked and you shall receive. A new stat we are adding into the video is number of books bought per deal. As you can see, there is a large chunk for the 1 book deals, a moderate amount for 2 book, and a smaller for 3+ book deals. I think this will be something good to keep in mind if you are writing a series. I think it would be a great idea to kind of like tell agents and editors this is a standalone with series potential. Next, let's talk about auction versus not at auction. An auction is when 2 or more publishing houses are in a bidding war over your book. These are obviously quite rare, as you can see from the stats here, but it is still happening. And I think 10% at auction is actually a pretty healthy stat. That's higher than what I thought it would be. That's exciting. That's showing that publishers are still really, really hungry for stories. Despite all of the doom and gloom discourse of, you know, traditional publishing dying, like they're still throwing money at some people. Next, let's break that down even further and look at the auction rates between YA and middle grade. There is double the amount of YA auctions happening than middle grade. I think this is an interesting stat, but not surprising because I think YA is kind of known for just throwing vast amounts of money at a very small amount of people and then maybe not marketing those books, but hey, you know, that's how the cookie crumbles. Now let's talk about the authors that are getting 6-figure deals. This quarter, there were 9 in total, and again, double the amount of YA versus middle grade. I had a request in my last video to show the racial identities of those who are getting the 6-figure deal. I think this was a brilliant idea. I don't know if this means publishing is like getting their game together or if it's just a fluke of the stats, but yeah, pretty interesting. Next, let's chat about the release season. I think that I can kind of start to conclude that middle grade grade has like one season shorter than YA when it comes to the announcement of the book and when it's coming out. It seems like YA needs an extra little season of cushion. I don't know if this is because YA is more saturated, there's just more books coming out in general, so they need more time in the lineup. I couldn't say, but it is very interesting to note. I always think this is a really good stat to look at because it can kind of help you gauge where you would fit in. For example, I would say if you're querying right now, it's very unlikely that you would be able to get an agent and a book deal and still have a book come out next year, according to these stats. But it is possible you could still have a book come out in 2025. Now let's take a look at format. I think prose is always going to be the biggest chunk, so I don't find this surprising. The thing I do find of note in these graphs is how graphic novels are slowly growing. I think graphic novels are definitely having a moment, especially in middle grade. You see that's almost like 20% of our pie right there. I've heard a lot of librarians say that this is such an easy way to get kids to read who are reluctant readers that don't want to pick up a prose book, but they would pick up a graphic novel. A good thing to keep in mind if you are a graphic novelist. Now let's look at middle grade and YA genre breakdowns. I want to focus first on middle grade here because I found the amount of contemporary being published here quite fascinating. Middle grade is always a bit more fantasy heavy, so this large amount of contemporary makes me wonder if the increase in book banning is leading to more contemporary books being bought by publishing right now, as if to like combat that, you know what I mean? Because a lot of contemporary books in general are like talking about things that some folks like to ban. So I just wonder if this is like in response to that or if it's just like a fluke of the stats. I don't know. What do you think? Moving on to YA, this is super interesting to me. The fact that horror and YA has just as big of a chunk as thriller mysteries is just like, wow. I really feel like horror is still having a moment in YA. I have heard whisperings of like a horror YA saturation point being reached, but as of what, March through May, I mean, they're still buying a good amount. I wouldn't worry for you YA horror authors. It seems like the YA horror space is still taking in books. One thing that I noticed in my analysis, in these videos, I like to kind of go back and look and see what was happening in pop culture and media at the time that these books were being bought to see if there was any like crossover influence that could be happening. And one thing that I think is really interesting is when we see this increase in horror novels being bought, it also corresponds with the time that the second season of Yellow Jackets was coming out. That came out in March. And a lot of people were picking up the show and watching the first season for the first time because of all the hype around the second season. And there have been so many YA horror novels that are using Yellow Jackets as a comp in their horror and book deal announcements. So I just find that really interesting because apparently that was working for acquiring editors at the time. Romance is also a big section. I don't know, I don't have enough stats yet to compare to see if this is the norm, if it should be bigger or smaller, whatever. But I do find it interesting that it is quite a large section and it coincides with Taylor Swift's era. Concert. I just wonder if all of the girlies were in their feelings and like wanted romance. One more thing I do like to do is break down the YA fantasy genre into subgenres because fantasy, you know, encapsulates so much. It technically could host horror, but I split those up. So for the fantasy breakdown, we have 23 high fantasies, 22 contemporary fantasies, 5 post-apocalyptic, and then less of the historical and the romanticities. I think this is interesting. First, let's pay attention to the post-apocalyptic on the rise. Is that gonna be the new it thing? The whole time that I was querying and writing my books, it was like, do not comp the Hunger Games, do not comp Divergent, do not write post-apocalyptic, and my gosh, do not write dystopian. But the tides seem to be turning quite a bit according to this number. It's only 5 books out of 173, but this is a large amount of acquisitions given that it's like a no-no genre. So I'm starting to wonder if this is coming back into swing. I think definitely that will be a very interesting space to watch when we have next quarter's stats to compare. Another interesting space that's going to be to watch is romantasy, because like I said, these books were most likely bought between March and May. Fourth Wing came out in April, and it'll be really interesting to see the stats next quarter because I would bet a lot of money that this romantasy number is gonna skyrocket because of the success of Fourth Wing. Next, let's chat about debuts versus repeat authors. As we can see, the debut section of both middle grade and YA is much smaller than the repeat authors. I don't know if I'm smart enough to analyze exactly why that is. My instinct is to say they monetarily don't want to take risks, so that's why there's less debuts. To me, these stats kind of conflict with the current narrative in publishing that YA is so like debut first, like debut hungry, always looking for the next it thing, which in some ways seems to be true, but is not correlating with my stats in any way. Also, a lot of times with repeat authors, they will have relationships with their editor already, so maybe that kind of gives them a leg up over debuts who have no relationship, no sales history or anything at all. I don't know, it's probably a mix of everything. Now let's move on to author demographics. First, we're going to talk about gender. This is middle grade gender identities versus the YA. Nothing too shocking here. In general, children's publishing is kind of dominated by women, and we do see the most like cis male writers happening in middle grade rather than YA. So I think these pretty much track with what we know about publishing. Hello, Editing Lindsay here. I made a dum-dum and I completely forgot to talk about the sexuality stats, so I'm just adding those in here. I think that these stats look about right on track with what I would expect. Obviously, we have some underrepresentation happening, but at the same time, a bigger chunk in YA makes sense to me because that's when kids are exploring their sexualities anyway, so just wanted to add that in there. Now let's look at the racial identities, and I'm surprised by this. Happily surprised. I mean, it definitely could be better, but deals given to non-white authors was a larger chunk than I had assumed, especially in the YA space. I mean, that's as close to 50-50 as I have seen in a long time. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in this space, but you know, a little bit surprising. I'm wondering if the stats are at all correlated with some of the pop culture things going on, because around this time we were also having the Little Mermaid releasing and Queen Charlotte, the Bridgerton spinoff, come out, and both of these feature Black leads who are teen characters, and as far as I know, both of them were like wildly successful. So maybe this was showing like, hey, these kind of books, I mean, these kind of stories can be successful. Maybe they were correlated. I don't know. Thoughts? Next, we are going to look at disability, and these are sad. I mean, these are really, really bad publishing. These are worse than any of the other marginalities that I cover in this video. I want to stop for a minute here and kind of do a quick little, I don't know, discussion, thought share about why these stats look so much worse than all of the other marginalities. But this is just like an hypothesis, a thought, something that I've been mulling over. I'm not saying it's fact, I'm not saying it's true, and this is a discourse, so I would totally like to hear your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. First of all, I feel like we need to say that, you know, publishing is all about money. Like, no one's shocked by that, right? All of these books that I've shown in previous graphs bought by publishing from marginalized creators was not out of the goodness of their hearts, like we're suddenly not racist or sexist anymore. It's because they have a book in the past that has done really well and they want to replicate that amount of success monetarily. And I mean, publishing does this stuff all the time, right? Like, all industries do this. They bottle cap how many marginalized creators can get in and say, oh, hey, look at us, we're so great, we're so diverse, we're doing awesome. And then the authors that they do allow to get in that are marginalized, you know, they're treated poorly, exploited, used as cash cows, kicked to the curb when things get rough. Welcome to capitalism. But it is curious to note that disability has so much of a shorter leg in the industry than other marginalities do, and I just find this very interesting, and I'm trying to think of why that is, and the only thing that's coming to mind is one thing. Unlike some of the other marginalized groups, there has not been a model book that has blown up that deals with own voices, disability issues, that publishing can say, ooh, hey, we love this. Let's buy a million other books very, very similar to try to replicate that. At least there hasn't been when these stats were coming out. Think of all of the books by Black authors that came out after Children of Blood and Bone and The Hate U Give. The Hate U Give was so successful for multiple reasons other than it just having a truly good message and being well written and engaging. It also had a good amount of timing on its side where a lot of people were starting to talk about police brutality, and so this book came out while those conversations were happening and it took off. Children of Blood and Bone was very similar but in kind of a different way. It had an exciting, engaging premise and a lot of splash behind the author, and a lot of time and energy was put into the book. And then at the same time we had all of this hype coming around for Black Panther, and so the book just kind of like took off and rode in that wave and became really successful. I think we can see the same thing in the queer space with Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda and Heartstopper. There's a whole other discussion there about women getting big for writing these stories about queer boys and that kind of kicking actual queer men out of the space of writing their own stories, but that's for another day, another person to discuss. And side note, it's very interesting to look back on a lot of these books that were bought trying to replicate this hype and seeing how those books are doing now. If the publishing house did end up putting their money where their mouth is and hyping them up and giving the publicity and the marketing that that they said they would. Is the book still being pushed today after the hype of these hot button issues or these movie hype is over or dying down a bit? When another book doing very similar things came along, was this book kind of pushed out of the lead title frame for that book to come in, and then another after that and another after that, and then all of a sudden we have all of these marginalized creators who were promised the world and then left to rot? Again, I'm just hitting the same points again and again. I'm just showing you that, you know, publishing is not treating these diverse authors the way that they should and the way they deserve to be treated. I guess the point I'm trying to like circle back to is that disability doesn't have a big splashy book like this. Not an own voices one, the way that some of the other titles I mentioned are own voices. I'm thinking of like John Green and his book about a girl dying of cancer. That is not own voices, even though that was a bit splashy. John Green was not a teenage girl dying of cancer, as far as I know. So given that disability doesn't have one of these big model books, publishing isn't seeing them as a viable place to spend money. Basically, to sum it all up, unlike the other marginalities, publishing has not found a way to exploit own voices disability yet. Interesting enough, there is now this little book, you might have heard of it, I don't know, it's very small, very discreet, called Fourth Wing. If you've been living under a rock, this is a adult fantasy book that kind of took the world by storm this summer. And this book does feature own voices disability representation. The author, and those not explicitly mentioned in the text, the main character has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And this is the first time we've seen an own voices disability book kind of take off. My thinking of this though is that it's actually maybe not gonna impact the way that I would like it to, because the book itself isn't about disability the way that The Hate You Give is about racial discrimination and police brutality, and Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda is about queer identity and coming out and things like that. Basically, this isn't like an issues book. This is a book that is a fantasy romance that happens to have disability in it. And don't get me wrong, I'm so starved for disability rep that I ate that part of the book up. I was like, yes, I love seeing a girl in pain and trying even though it hurts. And like, there are a lot of valid criticisms about this book in general, but specifically about the disability rep. All of those types of conversations have quite a bit of merit. But in a way, I'm still like in the corner, like rah rah, we finally have a little bit of representation. Even if it's not the best, it's there. However, I don't know if it's actually going to impact anything because, again, it's mainly focused on the romance and the action. The disability stuff kind of takes the backseat. When I do this video again in 3 months, am I going to see a huge influx of disability books coming in because of Fourth Wing? I think not, but stay tuned and we will find out. Anyway, that was just me spitballing my thoughts. I don't even know if any of them are right or even made sense, but let me know down in the comments what you think about this whole discussion, why you think that disability is lagging so far behind all of the other marginalities when it comes to representation in books. Now let's take a few minutes, self-indulgently just for me, to go over some of these book deals that like really just get my feet kicking that I'm so excited for. I've decided to cut it down to 15. It was hard, but I want to go through these kind of quickly. First, we have a book called The Devourer by Allison Ames, in which a young pirate captain hell-bent on revenge crosses the sea in the company of her crew and a girl she hates but can't keep her eyes off of, to find and kill her own brother, only to be waylaid by an eldritch creature looking for vengeance of her own. Yes, anything pirates, always. The gays are here, the revenge is here, the family drama is here. Eldritch creatures? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I'm so ready. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, so Scholastic's acquired The Witching by Natalie Lloyd, which you already knew, like it was pre-ordered and in my cart. Natalie Lloyd is my everything. I have every single book. She's my favorite middle grade author. She's everything I am and everything I'm not. The middle grade contemporary fantasy follows two tweens as they try to track down their lost loved ones while a magical windstorm that might have something to do with the disappearances wreaks havoc on their small town. That announcement, honestly, giving me nothing. I know nothing about it. I don't care. It's already going to be my favorite of the year. Next, we have Marissa Peschel's YA psychological thriller Darkly, in which a group of teens are chosen for a coveted summer internship in London at the foundation of a legendary and mysterious game maker whose empire Darkly is now defunct. Shortly after arriving, the winners are faced with unexpected and alarming circumstances. I really in general love how this author handles mysterious, creepy figures. Her book Night Film, which while not maybe my favorite, is so addicting in the way that it's like really a deep dive into the messed up mind of a horror movie producer. I loved that aspect. It was so addicting, and it looks like she's doing something similar with this, but this guy is like a game maker, and it sounds great. Okay, and this one's really interesting too. So Wednesday Books has bought Codebreaker, an interactive YA thriller that allows the reader to solve puzzles alongside the characters. The story follows 16-year-old Mia Hayes, whose father disappears and leaves behind a mysterious box with clues that may be the key to saving the country. First of all, wildly high stakes, and I love the idea of like an interactive book in which the reader gets to solve the clues along with the main character. It's giving like House of Leaves or Series of Unfortunate Events vibes with those books. Like, remember when you were a kid and you had to hold the Series of Unfortunate Events like up to a mirror to be able to read what was on the book? It just sounds like so much fun, and I love books like that. Another piratey seafaring book, Capitana. This is a YA fantasy inspired by Floridian folklore about a daughter of an executed pirate and top dark academia candidate, who has trained to become a seafaring hunter to capture pirates pillaging the empire before setting off on a journey to challenge everything she's been. Yes. I hope this is becoming a thing too. I hope that we see more piratey seafaring in the future. This is my dystopia comeback that I want to see happen. Oh, I'm super pumped for this one. So You Belong to Me is a YA psychological thriller in which a high schooler dives into a sapphic relationship with a rich popular girl who draws her into her mom's wellness cult, where something even more sinister is afoot. My favorite type of documentaries are cult documentaries. Back in the day, all the cults used to be about gods and stuff, and nowadays the cults are about like living your best positive life, and I just love that. My whole body is ready. I might be the most excited for this one. I don't know. Sourcefire Books has bought the Children of Katara series, pitched as an Egyptian Game of Thrones for YA readers. Say less. Where a princess, a priestess, and a farmer's daughter and a tomb robber are united by a forgotten oracle, and the pharaoh's death leaves the throne up for grabs. Oh my gosh, I'm so pumped. I was a Mummy and the Mummy Returns kid growing up, obsessed with it. Wanted to be like an archaeologist when I was like 8. There's also a priestess and a forgotten oracle. I love prophecies. I know that's a very tired trope that people are over, but I love it. I eat it up. And a throne up for grabs? Like these kind of stories, like, get my blood pumping. That's what I read for. Next, I put this one on here because I was very intrigued by this. So Tiffany D. Jackson is writing a thriller for a middle grade audience. The thriller follows a girl visiting family on Martha's Vineyard for the summer and uncovers sinister secrets as she tries to help the murder, like a shocking murder that happened on the beach. Honestly, that synopsis gives me nothing. Like, it doesn't excite me in any way, but I guess when you're as big as Tiffany D. Jackson, you can like give nothing in a rights report and like people still eat it up. And by people, I mean me. But what does intrigue me is the fact that it's a middle grade thriller, and I don't feel like we see very many of those. So this one is definitely on my radar. Oh, this one sounds like a very Lindsay book too. So this is a middle grade fantasy, The Library of Curiosities, in which an 11-year-old girl travels to live with her secretive, estranged grandfather, that's me, only to discover the library he runs is filled with not books but magical objects called curiosities. That just sounds great to me. I love the idea of a secretive, estranged grandfather. I love a library book, and I love a good magical object. I think this one sounds very cute and heartwarming and just whimsical. Oh, so ready for this one. Okay, debut author Jasmine Smith's Death Card, a black queer YA contemporary fantasy about a New Orleanian tarot reader and secret witch who is thrown when a pretty tourist card foretells that she will kill her by the end of the next full moon. I'm ready. New Orleans buzzword, tarot buzzword, secret witch buzzword. Amazing. Also, that hits that prophecy trope for me too. I'm like, woo. And then we have a Viking book. This darkly humorous YA historical adventure in the Age of Vikings follows the unlikely friendship between the daughter of a helmsman and a nun. The nun looks like she accidentally kills some kind of barbarian, and they have to flee across the sea to escape the Danes and their gods. I love it. There's not enough Viking books out there, so I'm pumped for this one. And then there's this sexy little number right here. Woo! Who is she? And a 6-figure 2-book deal. We have A Mastery of Monsters by none other than Authortube's own Lizelle Samberry. This is a dark academia fantasy in which a girl must join a secret society that may be responsible for the disappearance of her brother. She teams up with a boy who is not only months away from becoming a flesh-eating monster, and in exchange she must win a deadly competition to master his control of monstrosity. I love me a good dark academia. I love people turning into monsters. I love a deadly game plot. I also love Lizelle. So I'm sure this will be a win for me and one of my most anticipated reads of the year. Next we have The Pumpkin Princess. This is a middle grade about a runaway orphan who is adopted by the fabled Pumpkin King and whisked away to the land of the undead creatures that all go bump in the night. I'm just imagining Jack Skellington from Halloween Town adopting a little girl and being like, I'm a dad now, what do I do? It sounds very cute and very spooky and the perfect October read for me. I'm pumped. Next we have Simon & Schuster, who have bought 11 houses. The story follows a teen who lives on the remote island of Nova Scotia. She is one of the 11 ancient families who maintain a house on the island solely for the purpose of trapping the dead that come up from the sea in a brutal storm once a decade. When the mysterious Miles Cabot arrives, he upends everything Mabel knows about the island and herself. This is just giving me family secrets, family dark magic legacy, cold, creepy island water vibe. I'm there for it. And then the last one is another middle grade fantasy, and this one just sounded so cute and so interesting. This was bought by Source Books, and the title is The Last Great Heir. Rue Famine and Merriment Feast, how cute, have been raised to believe that the other and their house's opposing way of life is the enemy. The two must duel on their 13th birthday to determine which heir will assume guardianship of the land for the next generation. It's giving Three Dark Crowns vibes, but for a middle grade audience, and I love the play on words of feast versus famine. I think it just sounds like it's gonna be so cute. And those are the 15 books that I am most excited about that have been announced this quarter. So chat with me down below. Let me know, first of all, what you thought of these books, if you're pumped about them, like I am. Let me know about what you thought about the stats, if any of them pertain to you right now with your writing and querying or submission journey. Are there any stats you would like me to look at for next quarter that I can add to the list? And thank you so much for watching. I know this is a little bit of a longer one, so I appreciate you all, you know, making all the way through this. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and hit that like button so I know you like these types of videos, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're interested, my 2 middle grade spooky fantasy books are available for order wherever books are sold, but the links are always down below. I hope you all are having an amazing start to your December, and I can't wait to see all of your end of year Authortube content. So I will see you in the next one. Have a great day. I love you, and bye-bye.